Hello and welcome to a special episode of Nothing But the Truth. The result of the British election has come as a huge surprise. Labour has suffered serious setbacks, the Scottish Nationalists have swept Scotland, but most surprisingly of all, the Tories have a majority of their own. Joining me now from Britain to discuss this outcome and the future of their respective parties are two of Britain's most respected senior politicians. They are former Tory Cabinet Minister Andrew Mitchell and former Labour Minister Keith Vaz. Andrew Mitchell, 24 hours before the count, practically everyone would have said that it would take a miracle for your party to get a majority of its own. A day later, you got 5 seats more than the critical 326. How do you explain this incredible change of fortune?
Well, I explain it by the fact that the pollsters didn't realise that there were a large number of shy Tories out there who weren't telling them that they had decided when they probably had. And for someone like myself who fought the 1992 election, I always thought there were some similarities with the 1992 election, and that turned out to be the case. But you're quite right in saying that virtually no one in the political world expected the result that we have got. It was right at the very top end of Conservative anticipation. I've fought 8 elections, I've won 6 and lost 2. And in my experience, looking back, the British electorate usually get it right. And on this time, I rather feel that they have.
Keith Vaz, to what extent was your party, the Labour Party, hit by what I call a double Scottish whammy? You were wiped out north of the border by the Scottish Nationalist Party, but in England and Wales, fear that you might end up allying with them led to your losing rather than winning seats.
Good evening, Karen. Good evening, Andrew. First of all, can I congratulate Andrew on his election victory. It's going to be marvellous going back into Parliament with old friends like Andrew. But the result was a big shock. You're absolutely right, Karen. I think that there was a big surprise in Scotland. I certainly didn't expect such a huge defeat for Labour north of the border. As an English MP, or at least someone representing an English seat, though of course we're all part of the United Kingdom Parliament, I don't know much about the politics of Scotland, but certainly what they did very clearly is they voted SNP. We took a huge drubbing in Scotland, and at the same time we didn't win the necessary seats in England, round about my area in the Midlands, being the crucial area in terms of the battleground of British politics. Okay. We just didn't win those marginal seats. The Conservatives retained them, and that's the problem that we face.
Now, Andrew Mitchell, something that intrigues people, particularly outside the United Kingdom, is the fact that in 2010, your party, the Conservatives, formed a coalition with the Lib Dems, and you ruled the country for the next 5 years. But at the end of those 5 years, your party, the Tories, have benefited. You've got 24 more seats. The Lib Dems seem to have been penalised. They've lost 49 seats. Why has the electorate done this?
Well, it is a historical fact in Britain, which you may recall, Karen, that when there is a coalition, and there hasn't, of course, been one in peacetime for over 70 years in the United Kingdom, the smaller party does tend to lose out. I think this is the 3rd time there's been a coalition with the Liberals in one form or another, and each time they do lose out. I have to say this, though, that I served in the cabinet with Liberal Democrat cabinet ministers and with other ministers in the government. I found it a good experience, and I think that the Liberal Democrats deserve great credit in Britain for having put the national interest ahead of party interest. And I personally thought the treatment of Nick Clegg and of Danny Alexander and other senior Liberal Democrats shows that politics is a very brutal business here, and if it was a blood sport, it would probably be outlawed.
Keith Vaz, how do you think history will look back and remember the Ed Miliband years as leader of the Labour Party? Is there a danger that he could end up joining a list of people like Michael Foot and Neil Kinnock, who are often spoken of as failed Labour leaders? Might he now be a 3rd on that list?
Well, obviously he lost the election and he would prefer to have won the election, and he is in the company of those who didn't win. But actually, during the campaign, I thought he ran a very good campaign, and he was in a position to tell us as Labour MPs that, and the polls told us, that we were neck and neck. But that, of course, was a false hope. As Andrew said at the last minute, either people lost their shyness or they decided to make a decision not to vote for Labour. But the biggest problem for him was Scotland, and I think what we failed to do collectively, it's not just Ed Miliband, it's all of us, is that we failed to address the issue in Scotland, which meant that we lost so many seats up there. But as you said, Karen, if you look at the overall gains and losses, they're not that big for Labour if you look at England. They are huge if you look at Scotland. But I like Ed, I've known him for 20 years. I think the press treated him very badly. He's a very decent, honourable person, and he resigned at the very first opportunity. But you're right to say that he didn't win, and he will join those Labour leaders who didn't win. But, you know, I think he's a young man. He has a future in politics. We've had other Conservative leaders, for example, who've lost elections, like Ian Duncan Smith and William Hague, who've gone on to serve in Conservative governments with great distinction. And I hope Ed will stay in Parliament and contribute to whenever the next Labour government will come.
All right, gentlemen, let's focus a little, Andrew Mitchell, on what this election means for David Cameron, because he is not just the victor, he's also Prime Minister. Is he now a more powerful Prime Minister because he has a Conservative majority of his own, or does the fact that it's actually quite wafer thin make him dependent on your right wing and therefore perhaps more vulnerable because now he doesn't have the cushion of Lib Dem support which he had for the last 5 years?
Well, it's a shrewd analysis, Karen, that you make there. For now, his position is extremely powerful as he crafts his new government. He has, I think, really, for the first time, taken complete possession of his party. And so, for now, his is a position of great power and authority. And, of course, he's done that unusual thing in British politics, which is to advance as Prime Minister at the subsequent general election. However, you're right that small majorities do create difficulties for governments. Parliament itself will be more powerful over the next 5 years. And also, a small majority means that there will be more internal Conservative Party dissonance, inevitably. But this will be different from the 1992 government, I think, in two ways. First of all, the 1992 government, of which I was a part, I was a junior minister and then a government whip, for much of that time formed a sort of circular firing squad and did itself enormous damage. And I think the Conservative Party has learnt from that. And secondly, on Europe, which is a difficult issue for the Conservative Party, there is a plan. The plan involves a renegotiation and then a referendum where everyone can vote. It won't just be a sort of political fix in a darkened room. Everyone will be able to vote in that referendum. And I think that plan will bring some order to the Conservative Party as this quite difficult issue is thrashed out in Britain over the next 2 years.
So you're fairly confident, are you, Andrew Mitchell, that the right wing of your party, sometimes often referred to in the press as loony right, won't be indisciplined and won't threaten David Cameron?
Well, what I'm saying is I certainly don't think that the right of the Conservative Party is a loony right. But what I would say is this: I think the lessons of 1992 to 1997 have been learned. That there is a process here now which will bring some order and stability to the European debate within the Conservative Party. And I think the right in Britain has also learned that, unlike in the past, where it tended to be a debate amongst the right itself, you now only win these battles if you win them with the public. Winning them within a party is not itself sufficient. You've got to win it with the public. And that's quite an important lesson that has been learnt too as a result of the 1992-1997 Parliament.
All right, Andrew, we seem to have lost the line to Keith in Leicester for a moment, so I'm going to continue with you till we get Keith back. I want to focus for a moment with you on some of the challenges David Cameron faces, and some people believe that they're particularly difficult ones this time round. The first is, of course, the fact that he's going to rule a country that is sharply divided between Scotland, which voted overwhelmingly for the Scottish National Party, and England and Wales, where your party, the Tories, won enough seats to get a majority on their own without even bearing in mind the solitary seat you have in Scotland. Now, shortly after he won that majority yesterday, David Cameron spoke of adopting a one-nation policy. How would you, as a very senior, long-serving Tory MP and a former colleague of his, advise him in terms of reaching out to Scotland?
Well, what has happened is that the... hello?
Carry on speaking. I can hear you, Andrew. Go ahead.
I've lost him. Something happened here?
You've lost him as well.
No, hang on.
Andrew, can
I
you
trod
hear
on
me?
this, which is why, I think. Speak to me so I get level.
Andrew, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'll go back to the beginning of your question, of the answer, yeah?
Absolutely, yes. Go ahead. Start answering.
Well, I'm very pleased that David Cameron embraces the One Nation tradition. He is a One Nation Tory. I am the secretary of the One Nation group of Conservative members of Parliament. And a One Nation approach is going to need to accept that Scotland has become more Scottish and less British in recent years. And that is a difficult question to resolve. And it's not going to be resolved quickly. We have to have a lot of chat, a lot of talking now, a lot of thinking with our Scottish colleagues about how to proceed. But one of the issues here is I think that Scotland is heading towards fiscal autonomy, which means it won't be subsidised financially by England. And that is a very big change. But you cannot have greater Scottish autonomy paid for by the English. And therefore, you know, fiscal autonomy is coming with greater Scottish national freedom and national identity.
We've got Keith back. Keith, let me put you the question in a sense that I was discussing a moment ago when we lost you with Andrew Mitchell. It's this question of how will the new Tory government reach out to Scotland. At the time of last year's referendum, both your party, Labour, and the Conservatives were together in reaching out to Scotland. Will that same unity continue after this election? Or is there a possibility, or a danger perhaps, that rivalry and defeat might vitiate your unity on this critical issue of reaching out to Scotland and ensuring that the union stays intact?
Karen, before I deal with Scotland, can I just come back on one of the questions you put to Andrew, which I heard, which is David Cameron's management of the House. I think that the next few days are probably going to be the best days for any new Prime Minister as he forms his government. But I think management of the House with a majority of 10 is going to be very difficult. And I hope he uses the skills of someone like Andrew Mitchell to try and help him manage the House. Because with a small majority, with Europe being the dominant issue over the next 2 years, there are very, very firm views on Europe. David Cameron has a lot of skills. I like him personally. I'm delighted for him that he's won, and we wish him well. He was very helpful, as you know, with our campaign to get the mangoes back. But I think that there are tough issues on Europe, and as you said, Scotland.
We'll come to Europe in a moment's time, Keith.
Both parties have to be united.
Keith, I'll come
Scotland.
to Europe in a moment's time. Why don't you come back to my question about will you be united with the Tories when they reach out to Scotland? Give me a brief answer on that, not a long one.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have to be united with the Conservatives in dealing with Scotland. We want a united kingdom. We're on the same page, and we should do this together.
Now, one other question to you, Keith, before I go back to Andrew. It's the question I was going to ask when we lost you earlier on, and it's to do not with the challenges David Cameron faces. I'll come back to that in a moment's time. It's to do with your own party. Your own top leadership has been effectively wiped out in this election. Ed Miliband has resigned. Douglas Alexander, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, has lost his seat, so has Ed Balls, the Shadow Chancellor. Clearly, you're going to have to now find a new leadership, but in addition, do you believe you're going to have to jump a generation to do so?
Well, I'm very sorry for all those individuals. A lot of my friends lost seats on both sides of the House, and I'm very sorry for them. It must be a terrible experience. But of course it gives the party a chance for a fresh start. You're right, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, the Shadow Chancellor and the leader have now gone. But there's lots of other people there, and it's a chance for us to have a good think about where we want to go and how we want to shape the future. I mean, we've got 5 years to do this. It doesn't have to be done tomorrow. But I think an effective Labour Party in opposition is what any government wants. We don't want oppositions that don't do anything. All good governments get better if they've got an opposition that scrutinises them and makes sure that they deliver. So it's a big chance for us. You know, I've been around for 28 years in Parliament. We've won some, we've lost some. And at this stage, there's always recriminations. What I'd urge the party to do is actually concentrate on the future and have a good, solid election campaign, choose someone very good, don't rush into this, and then be able to put down the roots that we need for the future.
A quick question there. I mean, the last time that you lost to the Tories, and I'm talking about Mrs. Thatcher in '79, you ended up spending 17 years in opposition because actually, effectively, you couldn't find the right leader. And you went through several changes of leaders before you hit Tony Blair. Are you at all worried personally that the same thing may repeat itself?
Well, I'm always worried because I'm 58 years of age and I'd like to be in Parliament for the next Labour government. So 17 years will probably be too long for me. So I wanted, of course, to have a Labour government as soon as possible. The Conservatives have a majority, but it's only a majority of 10. It's not a majority on the Blair or Thatcher levels. We have to remember that.
Andrew, let's come back to the challenges facing David Cameron. The second challenge, if the first is Scotland, the second is the relationship with the European Union. Now, Mr. Cameron has reconfirmed that sometime between now and 2017, he will hold a referendum on whether Britain stays part of or gets out of the Union. But do you really believe that you can negotiate a new relationship with the Union, and particularly with Germany's Angela Merkel, that will place David Cameron and the Tory party in a position to then campaign to stay in the Union whenever that referendum is held? Or are you a bit worried that you might not be able to clinch that deal?
No, I am confident that we can renegotiate terms. Ever since we joined the European Union, which was probably the first time Keith and I voted in a British electoral contest, Britain's had an edgy relationship, a difficult relationship with the European Union because of some very basic differences. Now, I think this renegotiation is an opportunity to address those points and lead to a much easier relationship between the European Union and Britain. And, you know, one of the key areas that certainly antagonises my constituents in the royal town of Sutton Coldfield is the claiming of benefits by people who come in from outside this country. It's a much lesser problem than many people think. And of course, one of the difficulties is that it touches upon one of the core principles of the European Union, which is freedom of movement of capital and of people. But in the end, you know, it ought to be possible to renegotiate that in a way that suits everyone. Which is that people just shouldn't be able to migrate between countries in the European Union to take advantage of the benefit system, but should be able to migrate to meet labour market opportunities.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the issues that can be renegotiated. I don't think it ought to be beyond our powers to do that. And David Cameron is a skilled negotiator. He's already shown himself able to negotiate with his European colleagues and our partners. And I'm confident that there's a process set out here which can end in success.
Very quickly before I go to Keith, are you confident that David Cameron can get a deal that the right wing of your party will buy? I know you don't accept the characterization that the press uses, that they can at times be pretty loony. Let's leave that aside. But this is an issue on which they take very strong, rigid positions. Can he satisfy them? Give me a short answer on that.
I think there is everything to play for here. Because the European Union has changed so much with the in the Eurozone and the out of the Eurozone members of the European Union, I think there is a real opportunity now to put this relationship right and put this issue to bed.
All right, we seem to have a problem with Keith again. Forgive me, Andrew. I'm going to put another question to you, and it's one that arises out of the manner in which the voting happened. There are going to be a lot of political demands for changing the voting system away from entirely first past the post towards some form of mixed or more proportional representation. Because the problem is, otherwise, how do you respond to the fact that UKIP got 12% of the vote and nearly 4 million votes altogether, but just one seat, whilst the Scottish Nationalists got only 7 or 8% of the vote, with just about 1.5 million votes, but 56 seats. So do you think that's a pressure that David Cameron would be willing to give into and perhaps change the voting system? Because I know that this is an issue on which both you and Labour actually have very strong and similar positions. You're both in favour of retaining first past the post. Oh dear, we seem to have lost Andrew Mitchell as well at that point. I'm afraid, having lost both Andrew Mitchell and Keith Vaz, we come to the end of this particular debate. We've had a bit of bad luck with connections to England, but at least we had both of them for a very substantial part of the time. My thanks to both of them in absentia, and if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye, good night.